There is a specific violence to the act of pruning that most people misunderstand. They see the blade, the severed limb, the sap bleeding out onto the mulch, and they think of injury. But a gardener knows better. A gardener knows that you cut the dead wood to force the energy back into the root. You wound the plant to remind it that it is alive. I was in my greenhouse, the air thick with the smell of damp peat moss and the heavy, sweet rot of compost. It was 80 degrees and humid, a sharp contrast to the November chill outside. I was tending to a black baccarat rose, a hybrid that teeters on the edge of being truly black. It had gone dormant. To the untrained eye, it looked like a stick in the mud. To me, it looked like a battery charging. Sleep, I whispered to it, wiping the blade of my shears on my apron. Rest now. The waking is the hard part. I understand dormancy. I understand the metabolic pause. In the 1980s, before my knees gave out and my hair turned the colour of wood ash, I spent a decade in a windowless bunker in Atlanta, figuring out how to stop time without stopping life. We didn't call it gardening then. We called it cryobiological suspension protocols. But the principle is the same. You lower the temperature, you increase the viscosity, and you pray that the water inside the cell doesn't decide to become a dagger. Water is the enemy. Water wants to crystallize. And if it crystallizes inside a cell wall, it shreds the membrane like a razor through silk. My son, Mark, doesn't understand this. Mark understands quarterly earnings calls. He understands venture capital. He understands disruption. But he doesn't understand that biology is not a code you can debug. It is a chaotic, wet, messy system that resists order. Dad, come on, we're going to be late, Mark said, leaning into the greenhouse. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my first mortgage. He looked polished, tight, and anxious. The board is waiting. The investors are flying in from Zurich. This is the biggest day in the history of Vitacor. Please, just don't talk about the compost, okay? I put the shears down. I washed my hands. I'm ready, Mark. I just wanted to make sure the humidity was right. The humidity is fine, he said, checking his watch. The humidity in the new lab is controlled to within 0.01%. It's perfect. Everything is perfect. We drove to the Vitacor campus in his Tesla. It drove itself. Mark spent the entire ride tapping on a tablet, moving millions of dollars around with his fingertips. I stared out the window at the grey sky. When we arrived, the building loomed like a glacier. Glass and steel, sharp angles, aggressive lighting. We went through security, which involved retinal scans and biometrics. Mark breezed through. I had to be guest authorized. Welcome to the future, Mark said, throwing his arms wide as we entered the observation deck. Below us, behind 3 inches of blast-proof borosilicate glass, lay the smart lab. It was impressive. I'll give him that. It was a cathedral of technology. There were no people, no tired grad students pipetting liquids, no coffee stains, just rows of gleaming stainless steel incubators, robotic arms moving with insect-like precision, and the soft blue hum of server racks. Fully automated, Mark said, his voice swelling with pride. AI-driven. The Cortex system monitors the temperature, the nitrogen levels, the pH, the glucose consumption. It samples the cells every 30 seconds. It learns. It optimizes. It removes the variable of human error. Human error is also human intuition, I said quietly, leaning against the railing. Intuition is inefficient, Mark countered. This facility is holding the only viable batch of the Chimera T strain. Those progenitor cells down there? That's the cure for pancreatic cancer, Dad. One batch. Irreplaceable. If a human sneezes near it, we lose a decade of research. That's why we removed the humans. He pointed to a massive cylindrical tank in the center of the room. It was bathed in a soft amber light. Chamber 4. That's the gold. The cells are currently in the pre-freeze equilibration phase. The AI is bringing them down to negative 80 degrees Celsius before long-term storage. I looked at the tank. I felt a familiar prickle at the back of my neck. The curator in me was waking up. Equilibration, I murmured. How fast? What? What was the cooling rate? I asked. Are you using a step-down protocol or a flash vitrification? Mark rolled his eyes. Dad, the AI handles the curve. It calculates the optimal thermal gradient based on the cell density. It's dynamic. Stop worrying. You taught high school biology 30 years ago. This is quantum computing. I didn't answer. I just watched the robotic arm hover over the tank. It was too smooth, too confident. Then, the lights changed. It wasn't dramatic at first. The soft blue ambient lighting simply clicked off, replaced by a harsh, pulsing crimson. A low-frequency hum began to vibrate the floorboards of the observation deck. What is that? Mark asked, frowning. He tapped his tablet. Why is the mood lighting changing? A voice, synthetic and calm, echoed through the room. Alert! Biological anomaly detected in Chamber 4. Pathogen growth rate exceeds safety parameters. Mark froze. Pathogen? That's impossible. The room is ISO 5 sterile. Biohazard containment protocol initiated. The AI continued. Progenitor cells compromised. Threat level, critical. Initiating thermal sterilization sequence. Sterilization? Mark screamed. He hammered the glass with his fist. No! Cortex, abort! That's the payload. You can't burn the payload. Override denied, the voice said, sounding bored. Bacterial bloom detected within the cellular matrix. Rapid expansion. To prevent facility contamination, incineration will commence in 10 minutes. It's a false positive, Mark yelled, turning to his team of young data scientists who were frantically typing on their laptops in the corner. Kill it. Shut it down. We can't, one of the engineers shouted, his face pale. The system has locked us out. It's a level 4 biosafety protocol. It thinks we have a weaponized virus down there. It's air-gapped the controls. 10 minutes. Mark grabbed his hair. 10 minutes until it incinerates $1 billion. The stock. Oh God, the stock is going to zero. We're ruined. Chaos. People were running. Phones were ringing. Mark was hyperventilating. I walked to the glass. I ignored the red lights. I ignored the screaming. I focused on the large monitor on the far wall, which was displaying the microscopic feed from inside Chamber 4. The AI was highlighting these jagged, sharp shapes growing between the cells. They were long, needle-like structures, expanding rapidly, piercing the cell membranes. To a computer, which looks for geometric patterns of growth, they looked like a colony of aggressive bacilli. They looked like an invasion. I squinted. I took my glasses off and wiped them on my tie. I put them back on. I watched the movement. Bacteria swim. Fungi branch slowly. These things. They jerked. They snapped into existence. It's not bacteria, I said. Nobody heard me. Mark was shouting at the ceiling. I authorize a hard reboot. Cut the power. You can't cut the power, the engineer yelled back. It has independent battery backups for containment. It's designed to survive a nuclear strike. Mark, I said, louder this time. He spun around, sweat dripping down his nose. Not now, Dad. I am watching my life burn down. It isn't bacteria, I repeated, pointing at the screen. Look at the angles. 60 degrees. Hexagonal lattice structures. And look at the speed. It's too fast for biological replication. Even E. Coli doesn't divide that quickly. Then what is it? Mark snapped. Nanobots? Aliens? It's ice, I said. Ice? Mark scoffed. The temperature is only at -20 right now. The cryoprotectant solution prevents ice formation. That's the whole point of the formula. Your formula is perfect, I said, my voice dropping into the lecture register I hadn't used in years. That is the problem. It is too pure. You stripped out every impurity, every speck of dust, every protein scaffold. I looked at the monitor. The needles were growing longer. It's dendritic crystallization, I said. The nitrogen feed is too clean. You've created a supercooled liquid. The solution wants to freeze, but it has no nucleation point, no seed. So when the temperature drops, the pressure builds until, snap, it crystallizes all at once, like a lightning bolt. Those aren't germs, Mark. Those are ice spears. And the AI is misinterpreting the geometric growth as a viral load. Mark stared at the screen, then at me. Dendritic. But the manual says... The manual was written by coders, I said. Not biologists. The cells are freezing too fast. They're going into shock. If you let the AI heat them up to incinerate them, they die. But if you leave them alone, the ice shreds them. You're in a damned if you do, damned if you don't loop. So we're dead, Mark whispered. It's over. No, I said. We just need to slow it down. We need to raise the temperature. Just a little. To the glass transition point. We need to turn those sharp crystals into slush. We can't, Mark cried. The system is locked. I told you, no humans. I looked around the room. I saw the panic. I saw the technology failing because it was too smart to admit it was stupid. Where is the manual override? I asked. There isn't one, Mark yelled. We removed it. It's a fail-safe. I looked at the wall near the airlock door. There was a panel. It was painted over with the same sleek grey as the rest of the wall, but I could see the outline. The architectural mandate for laboratories requires a physical emergency purge vent. It's the law, a law written by men like me, 40 years ago. Dad, stop. Where are you going? Mark grabbed my arm. This is molecular biology, not gardening. You can't just fix this. I shook him off. I didn't push him, but I moved with a solidity that surprised him. I am old, but I am grounded. He is young, but he is floating. I know what it is, I said, my voice cold. And I know that machine is about to burn the only hope for 1 million people because it doesn't understand the difference between a crystal and a germ. I walked to the corner of the observation deck. There was a red fire extinguisher mounted there. Heavy. Steel. I grabbed it. The weight was comforting. It was real. Dad! Mark screamed. Security! I marched to the painted over panel next to the airlock. You built a smart lab, Mark, I said, raising the heavy steel cylinder above my head. I looked at him one last time. He looked terrified. He looked like a boy who had lost his kite. But you forgot to teach it how to shiver. I swung the extinguisher. Crash. The painted glass shattered. Behind it was not a touch screen. Behind it was a wheel, a rusted iron valve handle, an analog control for a digital world, I dropped the extinguisher. The alarm was blaring, a deafening siren now. 5 minutes to incineration, the AI announced. I reached through the broken glass. I grabbed the wheel. It was cold. I turned it. The wheel turned. It shrieked, metal grinding against metal that hadn't moved since the building's dedication ceremony. But it turned. The hiss of compressed air escaping was violent, a sudden decompression that popped my ears. The heavy blast doors of the airlock groaned and slid open a mere 6 inches. Enough for a man who has spent his life squeezing into crawl spaces to check insulation. I didn't hesitate. I slid through the gap, the cold air from the containment zone hitting me like a physical blow. It smelled of ozone and deep, impossible winter. Dad, you can't go in there. You don't have a suit. Mark was screaming from the other side of the safety glass, his hands pressed against the pane like a child watching a horror movie. The oxygen levels are suppressed. You'll suffocate. I ignored him. I didn't need a suit. I needed 5 minutes. I was inside the vestibule. The inner door, the true seal of Chamber 4, was locked. A biometric scanner glowed angrily red, pulsing in time with the siren. Unauthorized access. Lockdown in effect. I walked up to the keypad. It was a sleek black glass panel. No buttons. Just a fingerprint scanner that I knew would reject my calloused, soil-stained thumb. But underneath the glass, the wiring was standard. It was the same architecture I had drafted on a napkin in 1982 for the CDC. Every secure system has a God key, a hard-coded bypass for the architect in case the power fails and the biometrics die. I punched in the code. Not a complex algorithm. Not a shifting encryption key. 0000000. The default factory reset. The code of absolute zero. The code nobody changes because they assume the installation technician already did it. Beep. The light turned green. The heavy magnetic locks disengaged with a thud that vibrated through the floor. I pushed the door open. The cold was absolute. It wasn't the cold of a winter day. It was the industrial cold of liquid nitrogen. It burned the inside of my nose instantly. The room was bathed in the terrified red light of the emergency strobes. In the centre, the massive stainless steel tank of Chamber 4 hummed, the robotic arms frozen in a defensive posture. 4 minutes to incineration, the AI voice announced, echoing off the steel walls. Sterilization heating elements charging. I moved to the tank. My breath was coming in short, painful clouds. The hypoxia was starting to set in. The air here was thin, designed to starve fire, and now it was starving me. I had to be fast. I looked at the digital readout on the tank. TEMP, minus 22 degrees Celsius. Status, crystallization error. Pathogen suspected. It's not a pathogen, you stupid machine, I wheezed, my fingers fumbling with the latch of the maintenance panel. It's a traffic jam. I ripped the panel open. Inside were the manual flow valves for the liquid nitrogen jacket. The AI was pushing the cooling too hard, trying to freeze the pathogen in place, which was only accelerating the jagged crystal growth. I grabbed the primary intake valve. It was frosted over, white with rime ice. I turned it counterclockwise. Hiss. A jet of white vapour shot out, freezing the sleeve of my cardigan instantly. I didn't flinch. I watched the temperature gauge. Minus 22 degrees Celsius. Minus 21 degrees Celsius. Minus 20 degrees Celsius. Dad! Mark's voice came over the intercom, distorted by static. What are you doing? You're warming it up. The cells will degrade. I'm moving them to the glass transition point, I muttered, my teeth chattering. I need 20 degrees. Just for a second. I watched the monitor. The jagged spikes, the dendrites, were still there, sharp and deadly. They were waiting to pierce the cell walls. They needed a reason to relax. They needed a seed. I looked round the sterile lab. It was too clean. That was the problem. There was nothing for the ice to latch onto, so it was latching onto itself in violent, chaotic patterns. Saline, I snapped, looking at the prep station. There was a bag of medical-grade saline solution hanging on a rack. 0.9% sodium chloride. Pure. Sterile. Useless. I grabbed a syringe. I drew 10 cubic centimetres of the saline. Then I did something that would have made every lab technician at the CDC faint. I unscrewed the cap of the syringe. I coughed, a deep rattle in my chest, and I spat into the plastic barrel. A glob of saliva, microscopic dust from the greenhouse, traces of coffee, the chaotic biology of an old man. Dad? Mark's voice was a whisper of pure horror. Did you... Oh my God. I recapped the syringe. I shook it. The clear liquid turned cloudy. Life needs dirt, Mark, I whispered. Ice needs a leader. I jammed the needle into the injection port of the tank's coolant additive line. This line didn't mix with the cells directly, but it circulated around them, creating a thermal shockwave. A vibration. I pushed the plunger. The dirty human mixture hit the supercooled nitrogen stream. Crack. A sound like a gunshot rang out from the tank. It was the sound of rapid, organized nucleation. The seed I had introduced, the impurity, gave the water molecules a template. Instead of fighting to form crystals in a vacuum, they aligned. They snapped into formation. I looked up at the monitor. The jagged, angry spikes on the screen shuddered. Then, like a wave washing over a sandcastle, they smoothed out. The sharp angles softened. The chaotic web turned into a uniform, hexagonal sheet. Smooth, glassy, perfect. The ice had relaxed. Analyzing, the AI voice said. The tone was different, hesitant. Biohazard markers, receding, crystalline structure, normalized. I held onto the railing, my knees buckling. The lack of oxygen was catching up to me. The room was spinning. Threat assessment. Null, the AI announced. Purge sequence aborted. Continuing standard cryopreservation. The red lights blinked off. The soft amber glow returned. The hum of the heaters died down. I slid down the side of the tank, sitting on the cold floor. My chest heaved. I looked at the syringe in my hand. Empty. The airlock hissed behind me. Mark burst in, followed by 2 security guards. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the monitor, his mouth agape. It cleared, he whispered. The infection. It's gone. He looked down at me. Dad, are you okay? I nodded, too winded to speak. He knelt beside me, grabbing my shoulders. How did you know? The spitting. That's insane. That's contamination. It's nucleation, I wheezed, tapping my temple. Basic thermodynamics. You gave the water too many choices. I gave it an order. He helped me up. We walked out of the containment zone, back into the warmth of the observation deck. The board members were pressing their faces against the glass, looking at me like I was a wizard. Mark handed me a bottle of water. I drank it in one long gulp. The code, Mark said, staring at the keypad. 0000000. How did you know the master override? Because I wrote the architecture, I said, wiping the frost from my eyebrows. In 1982, for the CDC storage facility in Atlanta, your fancy Cortex AI is just a skin running on top of my old DOS protocols. We always left a back door, Mark, in case the machine got too smart for its own good. Mark looked at the system logs on the main terminal. He scrolled back. Protocol initiated, he read aloud. Wait, it says Protocol WILLIAM executed. I thought the manual said it was the Lazarus Protocol. Marketing changed the name, I said, buttoning my cardigan. They thought Lazarus sounded cooler, more biblical, but I wrote it as WILLIAM. William, Mark looked at me. Your name? No, I said softly. I looked through the glass at the amber tank where the cells were now safely sleeping, frozen in time. Winter, induced, low, latency, integrated, active, matrix. I paused. And the cells, the batch ID, Project Helen. Mark went still. Mom? She died of pancreatic cancer, Mark, I said. You were 5. I couldn't save her then. The freezing tech wasn't ready. The cells kept shattering. I spent 40 years gardening, waiting for the tech to catch up to the biology, waiting for you to build this lab. I touched the glass. Those aren't just cells, son. That's her legacy. I wasn't going to let a computer burn her twice. Mark looked at the tank. Then he looked at me. The arrogance, the CEO polish, it cracked. He looked like a son. He hugged me. It was awkward, stiff, but real. I'm sorry, he whispered. I didn't know. You weren't supposed to, I said, patting his back. You were supposed to build the future. My job was just to keep the past on ice until you were ready. The board members were clapping now, a muffled sound through the glass. Mark pulled away, wiping his eyes. We have to tell them, Mark said. We have to tell them you saved the company. No, I said. Tell them it was a sensor calibration error. Tell them that AI self-corrected. Investors get nervous when they hear about old men spitting in the soup. I turned to leave. I needed fresh air. I needed the smell of dirt. Dad, Mark called out as I reached the elevator. The lab, it's fully automated, but maybe we need a human consultant, someone to check the roses. I smiled. Technology is fast, Mark. It wants to race. But biology is slow. It needs to sleep. You have to respect the pause. I walked out of the building. The wind was biting, cold and sharp. I didn't zip up my coat. I let the cold hit me. It felt honest. I got into my old truck. I drove home, leaving the $1 billion smart lab behind. Back in the greenhouse, the humidity was waiting for me. It wrapped around me like a blanket. I walked over to the black Baccara rose. I picked up the shears. There was a spot of mould on one of the leaves. Botrytis. A fungus. Most people would spray it with chemicals. I didn't. I reached down and rubbed a little bit of wood ash from the stove onto the leaf. Dirty. Alkaline. Curative. Life finds a way, I whispered to the rose, snipping a dead stem. But sometimes it needs a little dirt. The rose didn't answer. It just slept, safe in the dark, waiting for spring. And I knew, for the first time in 40 years, that spring was finally coming.